Welcome back, all you lovely people. Hold you had a nice stretch of the legs there. Well, I want to talk now about how justification in ethics is supposed to work. We've seen a lot of dead ends, and the good news is I will actually see this as there's a lot there's new material here, but a lot of this will seem familiar to us, both because I think it's commonsensical, and fortunately I talked about this a bit in the first week of class when we were talking about all those runaway trolleys and about how reason works. So this shouldn't all be new, but I think it's good to dig a little deeper now that we've talked about relativism and have seen how moral reasoning can be perverted and rendered pretty worthless indeed. So yeah, how should we proceed if it's not moral relativism? And to getting us thinking about that, I included in the reading a transcript of a BBC radio program where they're talking about the use of drones to assassinate people. And this is the British government who was doing this. And so I think there's two important ideas that come up in this discussion that I'll mention and talk briefly about, just to get us thinking about, again, how should we be justifying things if it's not through feelings or culture? All right. Well, the first thing that comes up in this little discussion about the drones is this idea of trust and how do we, or what makes us want to trust our leaders and trust in their judgments. And so we get this little passage from Jeff Mead, and he says, I like this. He says, I mean, in a way, one likes to think we can trust our leaders in these circumstances if they pick targets for whatever reason to have a justification. I'm not sure I necessarily want the world and his wife to be aware of the full background details, but certainly there must be oversight, if not in public. Now, notice what he's saying. It's a pretty simple point, and one I think you look at and just you nod your head. It's like we're in church, and of course, what's new here? But this is radically different from relativism. Because what he says is he wants good reasons and justifications for these drone strikes. It's not just supposed to be ad hoc, random, revenge killings or something like that. No, it's not a matter of whether it feels right or not. It's a matter of there being good reasons and justification for these actions. And he even says, this is the kind of cool thing about how trust can work, is that we don't even need to know the reasons. Maybe there is, top secret security that needs to be protected, but we just want to be able to trust and know that there are reasons, that someone is looking out. That's why he says oversight. Someone is checking to make sure there are good reasons here and it's not being used for nefarious or bad purposes. So that's the first idea. Again, we want reason and justification because that is part of how we trust each other, is that there are reasons being appealed to. And the second thing in the article comes up with this nice and very interesting discussion of the rule of law later on. Loretta Napoloni, she says, I think it's a very, very difficult situation, but you must remember that one of the fundamental differences between us and the terrorists is the rule of law. We can't break it. All right, this is the foundation of the nation state. So you cannot kill anybody without any justification. So notice, once again, she's saying we need good reasons and justification for killing anyone, for killing people, even in war. She is suggesting that this is one of the hallmarks of civilization, and those who refuse to engage by giving good reasons and justification, they're not the good people. They're dangerous. And we don't have to get into the politics of the terrorism. This is a whole other issue here about this case. But I just want to focus on the fact that we're seeing the need for reason and justification. Just the very act of providing reason and justification is itself seen as a good thing. And the people who don't want to do that, they're the people who should scare us. And indeed, the person who just says it feels right should worry us because, wow, that's all there is? What if their feelings change? What happens? Or they're just doing it because their culture says so. I mean, that's how ideology and fanaticism starts to work. It can get quite scary. And so we can start to see there again. And I think Rachel's illustrate actually this exact same point with a very quick example they give about this professor and grading papers. I'll change the example, make it a little more spicy. But suppose after you guys get your first exam back and everyone in the class gets a 0. Gets an F. Everyone fails. Now, if you read my comments, because I like to put comments on things, to But suppose some people were like, yeah, you need to improve, F. Other people got, this was wonderful. Good job, F. And you're like, what the heck? And so you could imagine that students would start complaining about it. I'm sure you'd complain to me. You'd be like, Professor Gray, why did everyone get an F? You said this was one of the best exams you had ever read. It was mine. Why didn't I get an A? Why did I get an F? And what if I just turned to you and said, well, that's just your opinion. Agree to disagree. You'd be like, what? Agree to disagree. I'm sure you'd use lots of foul language. I'll keep it clean. You'd go online and roast me, rate my professor. Yeah, and look, rightfully so. You would be pissed, and you would be right to be pissed, because that is really crazy and unfair. That you get an F and there seems to be no rational justification for why you got that. But that's, again, we just care. You guys care. Even if you say you're a subjectivist, you care about good reasons the minute you get a grade that makes zero sense to you. You want reason and justification for an action. And again, once those people who refuse to give the justification, I look at you and say, that's just your opinion. Agree to disagree. Yeah, that's a dangerous, scary person. That's not a good person. That's the opposite of a good person. And so I think that starts to illustrate again about this fundamental way that we just care about good reasons in all sorts of areas of our life, whether it's, the major debate about using drones as a form of assassination, or just about fairly grading papers. And these all, I think, illustrate what I will call moral cognitivism. Now, just an FYI, just so you're aware, Professor Gray is using more, it's weird to call myself, Professor Gray says, that's weird. That's also kind of crazy. Anyway, how I'm using moral cognitivism is not what you'd see perhaps other philosophers do. It has actually a pretty technical, specialized meaning, but I just needed something that's close to give what I'm going to say, make just kind of context, because I need something that's different from relativism, and I need a word. And so I'm going to use the word moral cognitivism to illustrate this view. So what does Professor Gray, what do I mean by moral cognitivism? Well, moral cognitivism is the meta-ethical claim that morality is objective and universal, but only insofar as what is morally right or wrong depends on the weight of reasons justifying it. Morality depends on, or is maybe loosely now, is relative to the weight of the stronger argument. And this is what's going on in that debate over drones. They're trying to reason out whether or not this use of drones is good or not. But again, they're reasoning about it. They're not just going on guts and feelings and cultural norms. They're going much more beyond that and trying to find good reasons and justifications for doing it. And you reread that, I think you'll see that's what the whole conversation's about. And we've seen this idea, as I've mentioned, we've seen this idea so much all over Unit 1, right? Because Unit 1 was all about this Rachel's minimum conception of morality. We started there, where morality is, at the very least, the effort to guide one's conduct by reason. That is, to do what there are the best reasons for doing. Or we've seen, when I've been talking about the essence of moral reasoning, we've seen once again that the right thing to do has the best reasons for doing it. That is the essence of moral reasoning. And again, I'll mention even one other point that this is just kind of jiving along and working with now, is this idea that the give and take of reasons seems to be the proper way for moral equals to reach agreement without violence. If I force or trick you to do what I want, this is treating myself superior to you. If I failed everyone without justification, that's suggesting that Professor Gray is, well, loosely speaking, Professor Gray is above the law. I am the law. Above fairness, because he's just being random and assigning the grades, and that's not cool. That is wrong. Because, spoiler alert, you and I, we're moral equals. Now, look, I have some privileges and advantages due to my knowledge and my role as your instructor, but in terms of morality, I'm not any more special than any of you. I'm just being blunt. That's the fact. Unless you try to kill me, then maybe things change, but I hope you're not. And gosh, my hair is so long. Just flaps everywhere. No, we're moral equals. And the way that I respect you is that when I assign you a grade, I have to give you reasons for that. Or at the very least, you should be able to trust and know that Professor Gray does have reasons. Because if everyone asked me for everything all the time, I'd never get anything done. I understand that. But I think you believe, and I hope you believe, and please ask me if you're concerned about your grade. What was the reasons or rationale behind this? Because again, if I'm trying to trick you or don't even care about that type of stuff, I'm treating myself as superior to you. And that just seems fundamentally wrong. So again, I'm treating you like a slave or less than human or something. I'm just treating you like a thing to control or manipulate by forcing, tricking, or whatever, or just ignoring you when you ask for why I did what I did to you. Because moral equals give each other reasons and justifications. Because if you think your grade is better, you can't just say, well, it feels like this was an A. No, you'd have to say, oh, look, Professor, I mentioned this, which you talked about. You mentioned this. So why did I get a C? And I'd have to respond to that. And maybe even say, you know what, you're right. You should get a higher grade because of that. It happens. Professor Gray make mistakes too. I make mistakes. And so at this point now, wow, do you hear that? Dogs out there. It's problem of recording at home, I guess. But anyway, at this point, this is when usually students start to say, look, Professor, okay, we're with you. But how the heck does moral reasoning actually work? And so I do have to say that's actually a pretty hard challenge in a lot of ways, because I definitely do not want us to go back to ethical imperialism. Now, you might recall from a couple modules ago, ethical imperialism is the idea that there is one and only one correct approach to ethics and morality, and that is often then must be imposed on others. And so you might recall that the allure or attraction to moral relativism was that we didn't want to be imperialistically imposing our moral views on others. And so I don't want to go back to that. I do think reason and argument matter, but I don't want to become the full-blown imperialist forcing people to adopt a particular notion of how to reason about ethics. We're trying to keep it flexible. But Rachel's and Rachel's do help here. They do say, look, let's think about proofs in ethics, not the same as, but analogous to proofs in science. Because we can say our knowledge of ethics is always provisional and might require revision, in light of better arguments that we discover. So moral knowledge may be provisional, but morality itself is not. There is the better argument, whatever that may. Maybe we know it, maybe we don't know it. What we know, we're limited, we're human. But morality itself is out there waiting to be discovered by the better arguments. And you can see that's not the same, obviously not the same as science, but science works the same way, where it's always provisional. We might learn something new. A new experiment in science may change things. Similarly, in ethics, a new argument may come out. Because look, for centuries, people thought slavery was acceptable. But the better argument has seemed to have won out for the most part that it's not. Slavery is not acceptable. Slavery is wrong. And so we can, over time, come to know morality as we get better and better arguments. There may be setbacks. There always are. There's setbacks in science. But that's okay. That's normal. So morality is neither subjective nor is it just cultural convention, but it can be something based on our common human reason. That's the unifying factor. That's the objective universal thing, is that humans are capable of reasoning. And that's what we can consistently follow where the reason takes us. And we might have to, when following reason, have to revise our views because new arguments come out. And that's the humility we must have when doing ethics and reasoning about ethics, is knowing, yeah, we may be wrong. We may need to change. And that's okay. That's normal. Scientists do it all the time too. That doesn't mean science is garbage. And of course, there will be disagreements of people about ethics, between cultures, between people. Yeah, of course, that's why it's fun. But we don't have to immediately resolve it violently. Instead, we can try to reason with each other by presenting arguments and justification of the sort we've been talking about. We may even try to negotiate and compromise in a reasonable way. Negotiation and compromise require the use of some kind of reason to make it work. But in the end, we don't have to immediately jump to violence, which relativism at some point might just have to jump to, because there is no, we're both right. There's, how do you compromise us both being right about slavery? That's absurd. So yeah, Rosie the relativist doesn't help us. It's Rosie the reasoner. We redub her. That's what we want. And so again, people will disagree. And sometimes violence may be necessary in extreme cases, but we don't have to jump to the violence immediately. There are steps that we may try first through compromise, negotiation, bargaining, whatever. And so this is why I said earlier in the first week that I'm not going to give you guys an ethics checklist of what's. Sometimes just really do. They want an ethics checklist. Given a problem, here's the checklist you go through to determine what's right or wrong. I'm not going to give you that. That would be insulting, and whatever I'd say would probably be wrong, because you would find someone else would disagree with that checklist. So if you'll recall, what I said is my job is different. My job isn't to tell you the right answers about ethics. My job is to equip you with the cognitive and affective. So again, I care about the heart and the mind. These capacities to reason about these things, either for yourself and your decisions, or probably a lot of reasoning with other people to live your life. You're going to have to deliberate on your own about your life, but also deliberate with others about our shared existence, our communal life that we have with each other, whether that's with your family, your neighbors, your friends, your professors, your coworkers. It's never going to end your need to navigate and talk about and reason with people about these things. And now, again, students are like, okay, professor, yeah, we get it. Okay, we get it. Moral reasoning, great. We don't want to be imperialists. We want to be flexible and all this stuff, not restrict things. And that's fine. I understand. You want some guidance. So I'll just kind of give you two major areas of justification in ethics. And the funny part is I've actually seen these already. Now I'll just draw attention to that. Because the first area of justification we often talk about are our moral intuitions. Our moral intuitions are just our strong, immediate reactions towards something, to a situation, towards an act, towards whatever. And again, that's what we did with those trolley examples. I was gauging your initial gut kind of immediate reaction to whether or not you pull the lever or whether or not you're pushing the large man onto the train. These are our initial moral intuitions, sometimes very strong. Sometimes we have to think a bit about them. But either way, these are good starting points because they kind of give us a sense of how we're gauging things. So that's one way to kind of proceed, is just kind of seeing what are our intuitions about this situation. That's probably not going to be the end, but it is a good starting point, our initial kind of reaction to these situations. Pull the lever. Don't push the large man. Why? Then we can start to dig. And that leads then to the second area. So the first being moral intuitions. The second is rational evaluation. And this is just the need to explain more precisely why something's good, bad, right, wrong, and where, of course, there might be exceptions to those things. Things get complicated very quickly. And this is where we start to think about, in doing rational evaluation, are we being consistent? Our good old friend, the principle of consistency. We have to think, are we being consistent or are we being inconsistent? And that's okay because there is a valid exception in this case. Again, I think it is perfectly legitimate if you think pull the lever, but you refuse to push the large man. Yes, you might not be saving the most lives, but maybe there are other things that are overriding or creating that exception. We said repeatedly, we care about accuracy. We care about impartiality. We don't want to be biased. So again, you've seen this also repeatedly. We have already lots of good kind of reasons to start with that we can, consistency, accuracy, impartiality, that we can work with here. We're not completely out at sea. And again, we kind of can start with our gut. What do our intuitions say? And then kind of reflect rationally and evaluate. And then this can kind of be a back and forth process. The fancy people sometimes call this the reflective equilibrium. It's establishing an equilibrium between our kind of initial reactions and then our kind of evaluations, trying to make them come into harmony with each other. But those are very broad strokes, because I think going any further than that is that I would start sounding like an ethical imperialist telling you exactly what to reason about. And that's kind of the irony about relativism, whether you're the social or the individual subjectivist, is that you're kind of being an imperialist because you're restricting reason to one thing, either what's accepted by society, or you're restricting it to how you feel, and that's all that counts. That's pretty demanding. And so I don't think there is one right way to reason about ethics. It's going to be complex and a mess. People have been talking about this for centuries, millennia. It's been since people could think. which is forever, I hope. Well, not forever, you know what I mean. And so the good news, though, is that there is good news about flexibility, is that we can always reopen the conversation if the other person tries to close it. So they say, my culture says so. But you can ask, but is it right? Is your culture right? Or is this thing right? Just because your culture says so, is it right, though? And notice now you're asking them to get back into the game and give us reasons for why we should listen to society in this case. Because, spoiler alert, society can be wrong. Culture can be wrong. I don't think you need to know much history to realize that. And similarly, a person might try to close or end the conversation by saying, well, my feelings say so. Done. But you can then again, you can turn to them and ask, but is it right? Your feelings have led you astray a million times. And if they're your friend, you can probably tell them when their feelings led them astray. No, so are your feelings right? We can ask. So again, we're looking back to getting more reasons, digging deeper, getting those deeper, more real justifications than the surface ones about culture, society, or your feelings. Now, those are all important, but that doesn't have to end the conversation. That should start the conversation. You're just digging deeper for those truths than the stronger arguments. And yeah, oh my gosh, this is tiring. I've been doing it for decades, and maybe I have bags under my eyes. And look, maybe only God knows the truth of the matter, the ultimate reason, justifying human conduct. We're just finite beings who are trying to do the best we can while doing the best we can with the time that we've been given. And I would say, and maybe we'll come back to this the last module, is that I'd say it's a pretty valuable use of our time to be doing that digging and thinking about what's right and wrong, what's valuable, not valuable, and not taking the easy answer of my society says so or my feelings say so. We should dig deeper, and that's what we're doing in this class. I hope you're seeing it. We're doing this all the time in this class. Everything you read, now I can say it. Look, everything we're doing in this class is moral reasoning. I'm giving you papers that are providing reasons and justifications for stuff, and we're thinking about it and wondering whether or not we should believe these things. So we're digging for those deeper reasons. I'm not giving you a paper where a person says, do this. Why? Because I said so. That's not cool. That's not treating us as equals. And so, yeah, I think I really do. I think it's important to do these things, even if we don't. Because look, we may never find out the real truth in our lifetimes. We're finite beings, and the world's complicated. But I think there's no shame in us continually trying to dig deeper and keep asking why. It's a lifelong task, but one that I think is no small thing. Ooh, Professor Gray got a little philosophical there. Professor Gray still calling himself Professor Gray. Okay, that was pretty intense, I know, but I think it's pretty important. Obviously, that's why I'm teaching this class. So why don't we take a break, have a snack. I think it's snack time. I'm going to get some Cheetos. Maybe I shouldn't. I'll be all covered in Cheeto dust. Oh, that would be awful. Hope I don't. Okay. Anyway, so I'll take a break, have a snack, and I'll come back and wrap up this module. See you back here in a moment.